Good evening, 7 o'clock. I'd like to call the meeting to order. First thing on the agenda, we need approval of the minutes of March 20th. Anybody got any changes, additions? Motion to approve? John makes motion to approve. Second? Dennis Blake. All in favor? Old business. IWA permit 2008-11 four-lot subdivision on property located on Patricia Drive, cited S 175 Patricia Drive, Assessor's Map 50.21, Block 2, Lot 35. Applicant Cummins Enterprise. Formal request for second permit extension expires April 18, 2019, as approved by IWWC for 1-year extension. This is on the table. We have a motion to take it up. Mr. Hoydick.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to take permit 2008-11 off the table.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Thank you, Mr. Owen.
John makes second. All in favor? All right. Is the applicant or his representative present?
Oh, he is here tonight, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, Nicholas E. Owen for the applicant for the extension of the existing wetlands permit on 175 Patricia Drive. I just passed out a report and a cut-down version of a map which shows the delineation and the extent of the wetlands. I do have a big copy if somebody wants to look at a big copy. Actually, I have several. So if you'd like one, Christina, would you like one?
Yes, please, just to keep for the record.
All right, I'll give you two. And at the last hearing, it became a little bit contentious between Christina and I apologize for that. I did get a little bit excited. We had a serious disagreement of what should be done and what shouldn't be done based on the initial permit. The initial permit asked us to do certain things, and I am going to refer you to that permit, item number 14, which is dated. This is going to be a little bit redundant, but I would like to state it. I see Mr. Hoydick is here this month and another gentleman who I don't recognize to the left of him. The permit, I believe, is dated 2009. I could be off on that. However, it required us under that permit to do certain things. It required us to, and I am going to read from the permit. Item number 14, development of each lot shall be subject to an application and approval by the Inland Wetlands Commission. The final subdivision plan shall include a notation of this requirement. Further, individual lots shall not be cleared or developed prior to the approval of the Wetlands Commission. That simply means, and it's pretty clear, that before we do anything on this development, even though we have an overall wetlands permit to develop the property, we do not have individual lot permits to develop those lots unless we appear before the commission again for each individual lot and show this commission what we are going to do, and the commission obviously has the right to approve, deny, or modify. I'm not sure if any members were on this Wetlands Commission. I think Mr. Fay was at the time this happened, but it's been a long time since this happened, and Mr. Hoydick. And Attorney Knott and I represented the developer at that point for this particular petition. The next item, number 14, second paragraph, the permit authorizes the construction of the road, associated drainage, and the wetlands crossing. No additional work related to the development of individual lots should be performed under this permit approval. That's pretty clear to me, that we can do nothing. We are authorized to do absolutely zero except what we were approved for by cutting that road in or right-of-way to get to those lots. And before we touch those lots, we'd have to come back before the commission, as I previously indicated, to get approval on each and individual lot. And before we cut one tree down on the location of those lots, we'd have to appear before the commission and show them what we were going to save, what was going to be removed, and so forth and so on. The permit, number 15, shall develop a plan to phase in construction of the road and the box culvert wetlands crossing. The purpose of this phase plan is to prevent unneeded clearing and reduce the potential for erosion during the road construction process. The phase plan shall be in place prior to construction and should be available for review during the site meeting between the contractor and the staff. Okay. So now we know what we have to do. And now I'm going to tell you what we didn't do, and then I'm going to tell you why we could not do it as of yet, and that's why we're here for an extension of this wetlands permit, and that's when Christine and I got into it a little bit. We have been unable to get the Board of Zoning Appeals to approve an application for a waiver. It's called 3.14 of the zoning regulation to construct that right-of-way or road, because that road goes right through the middle of the section of the wetlands that the Wetlands Commission approved. The Wetlands Commission approved it. We are stuck with a situation where 3.14 of the zoning regulation requires us to go. It's kind of like a double bite at the apple. We have your approval, now we have to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals to get their approval. And I will tell you, at that time, this petition went before the Board of Zoning Appeals twice. It went to court twice. It was denied twice. The court upheld the denial twice. After a further review and calculating how we can get this job done, because this is not out of character, this project is not out of character with the neighborhood. We are in a 1 acre zone. Everything around it has 1 acre lots plus. Every house up there sits on a 1 acre lot. We are asking the Wetlands Commission, the Planning Commission, which an application has already been filed for the subdivision, to be allowed to use our property consistent with the planning and zoning regulations for a subdivision. So that second bite at the apple is a problem because we can't get to the 3 lots. Now, I've heard all of the arguments because I was at both Board of Zoning Appeals hearings. I was at all the Wetlands Commission hearings, and there's wildlife on the property. Yes, there's wildlife all over the area. This property shouldn't be developed because our children play on the property. Well, they're playing on my property. Our children build their forts on the property. Well, they're building their forts on my property. They're not paying the taxes on my property. They're not maintaining my property. They're dumping crap all over my property, but we should be allowed to develop it. So we determined that we are allowed, under the planning regulations, to file that subdivision for the 4 lots. We did. Actually, last night, I opened the public hearing, and I asked them to continue the public hearing for 2 reasons. The main reason is we are waiting for a finding from the DEEP as to the critter situation. It doesn't mean that we can't build, but they indicated in a phone conversation and followed it up with a piece of correspondence that the planning office has, that we may have to do some mitigation and so forth, which we are ready, willing, and able to do. It's not unusual in areas where there's critters and deer and box turtles and bugs and ants and squirrels, etc. It's not unusual up in that area because it's highly wooded. And I'm getting to the point where I am going to say to you, there is nothing in that planning or zoning regulation that requires us to go before the Board of Zoning Appeals first and get 3.1 approved. We can do it in reverse, or we may not have to do it at all. Now, the Planning Commission can look at our subdivision and say, Nick, we're looking at your subdivision, however, we're going to deny it because you don't have 3.14. That's where I want to get if it goes that way, because if I have to go to court, I want to go to court on that issue because I feel we can knock out 3.4 out of the zoning regulation because it's not treated evenly across the board. Perfect example. If I were to file a special case on this 12 or 14 acres up here and request the zoning commission to change the zone on the property, and if they did, I could build a church, an office building, a commercial center, and not be required to get 3.14. I don't have to get approval 3.14. So, but if I went for a subdivision, which we are, I am required to get 3.14. It makes absolutely no sense. So we're going to try to get that knocked out of the record. In the meantime, I'm running against the clock on this wetlands situation. I am here telling you there is nothing I can do on this property to comply with certain conditions of this permit, and that is the reason we haven't gotten started. If I put one shovel, cut one tree, do anything on that property without getting a permit from Planning and Zoning or the Zoning Commission, I am going to get a cease and desist, I am going to get fined, and I'm going to be in court, and that is the purpose for the request for this extension, so I can move this along. Ms. Beto indicated to me, and I don't say this aggressively, and I'm not sure her exact words were this, but it was, that's not our problem. It's not the wetlands problem. It's your problem. We are here in the capacity of a wetlands commission, and you didn't comply with certain conditions of that last extension and your permit, and she is absolutely 100% correct, but that the legitimate reason is we couldn't. She said to me, she said to the commission, that you could have and you could file an application to the Wetlands Commission for approval of each individual lot. I think some of you may remember that. Christina, did you say that?
Yes.
Okay. And she's correct. My answer to that was, I said, that's great, we could do that. But if we went before the Planning Commission and had a public hearing and the Planning Commission said, we are inclined to approve your subdivision, but we want you to move this, 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 and this. At that point, it would require me to come back before the Wetlands Commission yet again and ask you people to change my wetland permit for each lot. I saw, at least in my mind, it made no sense. In conclusion, Mr. McCann took a look at the report last month and he said, the report looks okay. I'm not sure those are exact words. He says, but it was not tied to a map, and we are not sure where the pins are. We're not actually sure if your wetlands are in the exact same location, if they increased or decreased from the original permit. And what I submitted to each one of you is a report and a copy of that map, and I am here to tell you there have been no changes. And to further bolster that, I have our wetlands guy, Mr. Veet. If you'd like to talk to him or question him, he is here to answer any questions at all, but you have the updated report that was requested tied to the map that Mr. McCann wanted to take a look-see at. Now, Christina told me she should have had that map 2 weeks ago. And so I'm not going to lie about it. It took us all this time to get it done so that if somebody went out there, they can't say, you're full of crap. We went out there and physically did it to make sure we were 100% accurate, that there were no changes. And the reason why we did that, if somebody decides to appeal it, let them take us to court and we'll hammer them in court that we did the right thing. And based on that, I respectfully request you approve this extension. Now, if you'd like to hear from Mr. Veet, I'm more than happy to bring him up. Christina, would you like to hear from him?
Well, to be perfectly honest, this is because we just got the updated delineation report. I personally would like to have time to review it and also compare it to the previous report from 2008, which honestly, I'm not sure I even have available. Do you have the 2008 report?
Not with me. Not with me, I don't.
Would you be able to send it to me?
I will. What you're saying is you don't have it in your files, or you can't find it in your files?
I cannot find it. So if you happen to have it, if you can get it to me, that would be fantastic. If not, I understand. Also, the Planning and Zoning Department may have the 2008 delineation. If you wouldn't mind sending it over, that would be great, just so I could compare the two.
Be more than happy to.
That would be good. One thing I do want to say, though, one thing I'm still confused about, who actually owns the property at this point? So originally, the permit was to Success Inc.
That's correct.
And now, not only would this be a permit extension, we would also have to transfer the permit
to the new owner who foreclosed on the property, the Barrett people.
Okay. And so ultimately, they will be the ones responsible for...
That is correct.
...all permit conditions, should it be extended.
That's correct.
Okay. And getting back to this issue with 3.14, I need to just state on the record that I understand where your side of the argument is coming from. I get what you're saying. But again, when this property was purchased, the owner at that time, Success Inc., was aware that the wetlands regulations were the wetlands regulations, the zoning regulations were the zoning regulations, and they were going to have to find a way to work their development into the criteria of each of those different regulations. And that includes 3.14, which is no development within 50 feet of a wetland, as per the zoning regulations. So, to me, I mean, this is something that's been known for the past decade now, that you were gonna have to battle it out on the 3.14 issue. And yes, we granted you an extension last year to see if you would be able to come back and have these situations ironed out. But now it's been another year that nothing has really happened. We gave you a rubric of what we wanted. We didn't get that. So now, you know, at the last minute, we're getting our delineation report, which I do appreciate. But still, we're gonna have to take time to review it. It's gonna be up to the commission whether, first of all, they accept the delineation, and accept it for review. And then we have to decide whether it indeed matches up with the previous delineation. And then from there, it's up to the commission to decide whether or not to approve the extension. So first of all, I think the commission needs more time, obviously, to look over the delineation report and delineation maps that were prepared, and go from there. I don't know if we can come to a decision tonight on it.
I don't have an issue if you need an additional month to look at it, because I think what you're going to find is what I suggested just in my prior testimony. I know you did. You weren't here. And I'm going to look at you because you asked the question last month.
I
Bill.
personally think it would be premature to make a decision tonight. So I think the prudent thing to do would be to table it and review everything. With that said, though, it still doesn't guarantee that you'll get the permit extension.
But it doesn't guarantee that I won't either, and you guys need...
Correct.
And you guys need... And
That's
look, and I
correct.
understand everything that you're saying, but you guys need to understand that this is a 2 or a 3-step process. And we've been in court for almost 4 years with this thing. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be in court again or we're not going to be in court again. If the Planning Commission turns down this 4-lot subdivision on 1-acre lots in a 1-acre zone, I can assure you we're going to court. It's going to be at least another 14 to 18 months. If the court comes back and says that the commission should have approved the application subject to 3.14, and you need to go back to the Zoning Board of Appeals and get 3.1, get the 3.14 waiver granted, and the Board of Zoning Appeals denies it, I'm going to assure you we're going to be back in court fighting that battle again on 2 grounds. One, that the Zoning Commission does not have jurisdiction over any wetlands in the state of Connecticut. Now, the argument's been made, well, the Wetlands Commission has jurisdiction over wetlands, the Zoning Commission and the Board of Zoning Appeals has jurisdiction over zoning issues. This is not a zoning issue in our opinion. And I will further tell you guys, and I think I said it last month, up until about, now 3.14 was enacted into the zoning regulations, I believe, in the 80s. The town attorney could probably better tell you. I'm a little bit foggy. I'm not sure.
No, that sounds right.
I'm sorry?
That sounds
Okay.
correct.
Up until last year, the Board of Zoning Appeals never, ever denied a crossing on an application of 3.14, except for this project. Because at both of those Board of Zoning Appeals, there was an emotional appeal by neighbors that, oh, woe is me, they're going to ruin the wetlands, the turtles, the frogs, the kids, the bikes. I heard it all. And they used that as an argument to deny it. To me, it was a travesty.
Well,
That's nonsense.
I was not at that public hearing.
I know
but
you
my
weren't.
guess would be that
You weren't here.
it's adjacent to, I mean, you're close to Roosevelt Forest.
What
You're close
difference
to
does that
town
make?
open space.
What difference does that make if I'm close to Roosevelt
It would go
Forest?
against the entire plan of conservation and
Wrong,
development for
wrong.
the town.
They're telling me that because the town of Stratford has a plan of development, and Roosevelt Forest is an important aspect of that plan of development for that area, that I have to, in effect, donate my property, continue to pay taxes, and not be able to develop the upland. That's what you're telling me.
That's incorrect, because I believe even in the Supreme Court decision that came back, they told you, you can come in with an application to develop, it was at least one of the lots that wasn't even within.
And that was going to be problematic, and that's why we did not do it on an individual
But it was
basis.
problematic because it was, for you, you were, I believe, arguing that it was an economic hardship, which the court found it not to be. They're like, we can't renege on a town's environmental regulations and zoning regulations because of an economic hardship incurred by an owner who purchased the property knowing full well what the regulations were.
And I'm not
That's
gonna-
what I got out of it.
And I'm not going to say you're totally incorrect, but it wasn't based solely or mostly on an economic hardship. It was based mostly on fair play. So what you're telling me is that maybe the Wetlands Commission shouldn't approve this application in the first place. If they were so concerned about the comprehensive plan of development for that area, then nothing up there should be developed. And in fact, wait a minute, let me think.
Go ahead.
Everybody that has houses up there on 1 acre lots, the town should condemn them all, knock them down, and leave it for open space. Because every one of those houses that is adjacent to this property is adjacent to wetlands. Now, I don't want you to tell me that, well, the rules were not in effect for wetlands back then. If there's wetlands, there's wetlands. If you need a permit, the appropriate place to get a permit is the Wetlands Commission. That's why we're here. You granted the wetlands permit. We did our job. You approved the application. All I'm asking you to do is extend it and give us time to get our subdivision approval. I'm not asking for any more or any less. I'm not asking you to decrease the wetlands or expand them. And that's why we did those reports and we laid out the map.
And like I said, we'll take another month, we'll review the information that was given to us. But I mean, it should be stated on the record that it's literally been a decade that you've had to argue the 3.14 issue in court if you wanted to. So, I mean, that's a separate issue, but.
Well, you keep bringing it up, and you keep using it against granting of an extension.
No, what I'm saying is, you're saying that 3.14 is holding you up with the zoning department. So you had a decade to battle it out with the zoning department to get that 3.14 done away with if you wanted to.
And we have
Then you
been.
could come back to inland wetlands and you wouldn't have any of these issues about developing or about moving forward with getting the road put in, and then you could give us the applications for the 4 different lots and go from there. So 3.14 is the hangup, but it's a separate issue from us. That's an issue that you have with the zoning department.
So are you saying to me you want me to file an application to the Wetlands Commission?
I'm just giving you a suggestion,
Oh, wait.
because it seems
You are
like the horse is being put in front of the cart.
You are suggesting to me that it might not hurt if I filed an application on each individual lot before the Wetlands Commission and get each individual lot approved, even though I don't have my subdivision approval yet, even though the Planning Commission may say, we don't care, you got to go back to the Wetlands Commission again.
All I'm saying, once again, is the rules are the rules. I didn't write them. We're just enforcing them. We're just going by what the inland wetlands regulations say. And we asked you in the permit, we asked you in the first permit extension to have the applications for the 4 separate lots. And we don't have them yet. That's all I'm saying. And it's up to the commission to decide whether they want to approve your extension. I'm just laying out all the facts. It's up to them. And whether like you said, as you said, if we do grant the permit extension, you still have to come before us to get the 4 separate lots approved. So there's that aspect of it. It's not like if we grant the extension, you're just gonna come in and clear cut all the 4 lots. That's not gonna happen, I understand. But I'm putting out all the facts for the commission because it should be stated on the record.
If you are suggesting, and then I will close my arguments, that you think I should file a wetlands application for each individual lot, I will do that, keeping in mind I may have to come back twice or 3 times to this commission for the same lots if the planning commission turns around and modifies my plan. You do understand what I'm saying?
I do understand that, but that's
And
our
that's
job.
okay.
Absolutely, that's our job, is to take these applications, review them, and when they get kicked back from planning and zoning, you get a permit modification. We change it. That's the way that it's handled.
I understand, and I thank you for your time this time. Until next time. Any questions?
Mr. Hoyt?
Yeah, I like to comment about the subdivision itself. I try to think back to 2008. I was on the commission. I might have been chairman at that time. I don't remember, actually. But I know that a big stickling point, and if anybody's gone out there, I haven't been out there since 2008 when the application was presented, and saw the area and saw what the lay of the land is and where they want to put this project, okay? I know back then that it was an issue with each individual lot coming before us after it was approved and for the submission of a permit for each lot, mainly because it's such a sensitive area. The footprints of the house back then weren't delineated. I don't know if they are now, okay? But it just has to happen. There's no way around it. In my mind, you have to come back for approval on each lot. If you want to submit another application, fine. If you want to go back and fight with planning and tell them that wetlands is going to make an issue if they move the footprints of the house, fine. But I don't see any way around it. If you look at the parcel, if you look at the surrounding area, if you look at the impact that you could have, potential impact, and not know exactly what those houses are going to be like, we're crazy. That's my comment.
Mr. Hoyt, I'm not disagreeing with you. We know we have to come back. My issue was, should we come back now and have the Planning Commission potentially say, we don't like this layout, we want you to move this 2 feet, 4 feet, and then come back here again? Or does the commission prefer that we file those applications now and get approval, and whatever the Planning Commission does, the Planning Commission does? I have no problem filing those applications. Well, it appears that at least the administrator, Tina, would like to see those, or would have liked to seen those applications come in on those 4 lots. And if that's the case, it'll probably take us a month and a half to get those in, and I will get them in.
But Nick, one of if you're going to come in with a separate application for each lot, suppose they don't all get approved,
By?
the Inland Wetland Commission.
I can't imagine that they wouldn't. And I don't say that as trying to be a smart aleck. I say that because we are going to comply with whatever the conditions are.
Okay.
Whatever the overall approval was, we know we have to fit within those confines. I'm not going to say, well, now I want to change this from the original permit. No, we're going to come in the way it's supposed to come in. Now, you and I do have a disagreement. We were told at that wetlands hearing, although your correspondent doesn't reflect it, and I don't know if there was a tape in those days or how you did it, because it was in the basement of the police station or the fire department.
Wait, you're talking about at the hearing?
The original
that you
one.
had? Okay.
That we were to come in, I'm sorry?
Fire department, I think.
Fire department. In an administrative capacity, and that you were going to approve, not you, commission was going to approve them in an administrative capacity. That's the way we're going to submit them.
That's not what the permit reads.
It doesn't read that there's a public hearing.
It reads,
It reads that there's a hearing. Maybe I'm mixing my terms up. This is a hearing, not a public hearing, and it's not an administrative session, so I'm incorrect with my terminology.
further individual lots shall not be clear-cut or developed prior to the approval of the Inland Wetlands Commission. So you would have to bring an application in for
Correct.
each separate lot for approval by the commission.
Okay.
And that would follow the same course as any other application we would receive, which means it could be sent to public hearing if it is anticipated that it could have a significant impact.
Okay.
So they could go to public.
All right, then I stand to be corrected. And we will make sure they comply so we don't need another public hearing and end up in court for another 18
That
months.
remains to be seen.
I'm sorry?
That remains to be seen.
That remains to be seen. All right.
But I would recommend that the commission tonight table this until we've had time to review all of the documents, and if you could get me the original delineation from 2008, the report, that would be fantastic. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
I have a question. If this area had no wetlands, does 3.1 still apply?
No.
No, if there was no wetlands and no water
In other words,
courses,
if there was no issue with wetlands.
No.
And he goes before planning, does the 3.1 issue still exist?
no,
No.
because 3.14 just says no development within 50 feet of a wetland or water course. So if there's no wetlands or water course, that does
There's
not,
no issue.
And whether we
as far as I know.
approve or deny the extension, he still has to go back to planning. Planning is still gonna send it back to us,
Maybe.
no?
Yes,
Perfect.
for another public hearing and another approval.
So we're going from this closet to this closet, back and forth again and back and forth, and nothing's ever gonna get done. I mean, that's the way I see it. No?
It depends on what we receive.
Well,
It depends on if we receive an approvable application for the lot development. And then we would approve it, and then it would have to be approved by planning and zoning as well.
And if planning and zoning changes his footprint,
He has to come back to us for a modification.
and if that footprint winds up pushing him closer to the wetlands, then we have to deny everything.
Or modify,
potentially.
or modify.
Or modify it, or just say you need to shrink the footprint of your
I'm rolling
building.
things in my head, I'm just trying to understand, from here to here to here to here.
It's a lot of dynamic.
Slow.
But that's, honestly, that's the nature of the beast when it comes to constructing
Sensitive
homes near
areas.
wetlands.
So
Jess?
just for my clarification, if no matter what, he has to come back to this body, then I don't see the downside of making an extension if you still know you have the ultimate power to protect the land, which is the point, and to make it as easy for people to be able to get that done. So I think we may be overcomplicating it. Again, you know the laws and rules. I don't. But in terms of to me, it's a matter of maintaining control. And I think there's enough in here to be able to do that. I mean, that's just my read of it, and please tell me why it's not.
No, I think that's a perfectly acceptable argument and a perfectly acceptable, and I think that's an acceptable, conclusion that you've come to. But the rules are the rules, and things weren't submitted in the format that they were, or in the manner that they were supposed to, and we've asked multiple times now for, the applications for lot development. That was a term of the original permit. And in my mind, it seems that having an application just to build a road is also kind of strange. We have an application before us, or excuse me, he has a permit to build the road into this area of development, yet there's no development that's been approved yet. I'm not even sure why, when this first came around to the Inland Wetlands Commission, why they approved a road with no development around it. So it personally, if this was to come to me now as one complete application, I would want to see the road with all the 4 lots in one shot. So I'm not sure where along the
That's not how it
lines we
works.
just approved the road. But I mean, you're perfectly entitled to that opinion. But, you know, from looking at this from a regulatory standpoint and standing by our rules as an agency, there were certain things that were supposed to have been met in certain timeframes, and they weren't. But now Nick has come in with the delineation. We can certainly review it, and if that boundary, as you say, hasn't changed, if we uphold that, then maybe we do grant the extension. That's up to the commission.
Christina, I want to respectfully correct you on something.
Okay.
I understood what you said. I think it's misinformation. Our first step in any development in this town, under the regulations, is if there are wetlands anywhere on the property and they affect the development, no matter what the development is, we come to you guys first. That's what we did. Therefore, when we presented our application, it included the road. So, in my opinion, and obviously in the commission's opinion at that time, and under your rules and regulations then and now, excuse me, we complied with the regulation, and you approved what we asked for, and you approved the crossing. You're done. You're done. Now it's up to us to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals. I know I'm being redundant. If they approve it, they approve it. If they don't, we fight it. And we fought it twice. And that's what has taken up almost 6 or 7 years. It's not as if we sat here and did nothing and didn't want to come back to you guys and get those lots approved. We didn't know what we were going to get approved based on what was going to happen. And now we think we found a way to do it. And based on that, we filed the application. And it's up to the Planning Commission whether they want to approve the subdivision or not. That's why we're here. I'm not here to give you a hard time, although
I understand.
although I like giving you a hard time.
McCann?
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question of another commissioner through you? I'd like, Mr. Hoyt, can I ask you to, as I recall this, when this permit came through, there was a stipulation. I don't know if it was articled in the minutes, but I remember it was a strong discussion that each one of these lots was going to come back in a timely manner, showing us the housing sites and all the infrastructure that was required. Is that?
Yes, and that's my stickling point. I remember that, and maybe it wasn't recorded as it was intended, but I remember that because of the lay of the land and how these houses were going to be fashioned on these lots, that it was so critical that we had a say on any stipulations for each particular house, okay, in terms of grading and fencing and whatever you want to say, okay? But in my mind, I remember that that was a very important point, and here again, Dr. Chess has a good point. There's enough in the original application to protect the wetlands, but it has to be clarified, and right now, it's not clarified. The applicant is trying to say one thing, and the commission is saying something else, and there has to be clarification. And in my mind, there's no wiggle room when it comes to each lot being a separate application. Thank you, Mr. McCann.
But the fact remains, he cannot get a building permit for a house on any one of these lots until he comes to us to make sure that that permit, the septic, blah, 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 meets the regulation. So
That's correct.
So
I can't make a move without
nothing's going to be built
Nothing.
until it comes before us and we up or down on it, until we are in agreement that whatever is proposed is acceptable.
I understand.
So we have just received this documentation. I would agree with our administrator that she ought to have a chance to take a look at it and compare it. So, having said that, would someone like to make a motion to table this?
I will make a motion to table it. And if, just might add to that, I think if we can also look into some of the old recordings or minutes of the original application to see if there were any specific stipulations. But I know this is a difficult one, and I agree with you that, you know, a renewal seems like it should be a very easy process. And, but This one obviously isn't, and I don't think another month is going to really be
I don't
hardship.
think there's any objection.
You've waited a while, so give us a chance to take a look at some of the stuff, and
No. The applicant stated he doesn't object.
I have no
to it.
objection.
Right. So
No
we have a
objection at all.
motion to table this. Do we have a second? Mr. Cinto, all in favor? All right.
Thank you.
See you next month.
Yep.
All right, moving along. Next item on the agenda, permit 2017-4, construct a restaurant and associated parking lot, increasing impervious area by 14,000 square feet and altering 4,634 square feet of wetlands, and 25,704 square feet of upland review area. Site address 577 Holly Lane, reference map 30.17, block 3, lot 73. Applicant Par 1 Development, here James Fitzpatrick is the applicant or his representative here.
Good evening, James
Mr. Chairman, I'd
Fitzpatrick.
like to make a motion to take
Oh, excuse me, we have to take this off.
2017-4 off the table.
We have a motion to take it off the table. Second. Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Good evening. James Fitzpatrick, 170 Morning Dew Lane. I am the applicant. Basically, what I have before you is a demolition report on how what our steps are to remove the structure. After I post my $20,000 cash bond, put up the silt fencing and have a walk with the Christina, the administrator, on site, and also note the trees that we're going to be looking at that need to be removed. Some are in the construction, in the way of construction, and some are in very, very bad shape and are falling down as we speak, basically. So the plan is fairly simple. I follow the rules. We bring the dumpsters in. We work off of our pad that is clearly marked there in orange. We don't go over the silt fence wetland boundary. We take the house down, we keep it wet, and we take it off-site, and then we get into construction after I get my building permits.
I have a couple questions. I just had a few questions that perhaps you can address. Have you assessed the building for any hazardous building materials? And
We're
how
in
will
the
they be
process of doing that.
Perfect. So
Right.
that'll all be handled by like a certified demo contractor who will take that material off-site?
If there are materials there, it's an environmental company. We have our own demolition license. So
Okay.
we're the contractor, but
Do you think you could just provide me like the information on who the so it's you?
yes,
Okay.
yes. I'll give you the licenses. I have my licenses and
That
what
would be
have you.
good, just so I have it on the record.
But I have to do that for building permit anyway. I can't get a building permit without going through the testing procedure.
Perfect. You mentioned keeping the building wet as you're taking it down.
Just for dust purposes.
Correct. That was one of my things. I just wanted to make sure that fugitive dust would be held to a minimum. Another comment, ensure that silt fencing, this is on a couple of the plans that you submitted. I think it was just an oversight, but I want to make sure that the silt fencing goes all the way out to the property boundary on Holly Lane on a couple of the,
Oh, yeah, this one doesn't have.
yeah, on a couple of the plans that you submitted, you just didn't have the area highlighted all the way to the road.
And that is because I followed the surveyors, the civil's markings,
Got it.
normally I would go all the way out to the street, because
Okay.
that's the area disturbance.
All right, so does the silt fence go all the way out to the street, or will it?
It will,
Okay.
it will. It'll go right out to the curb line on each
And I'll be
side.
able to see that on site when I go out to have the site meeting.
Yes.
For removal of the trees that are close to the wetlands, I don't know how close they are, and I don't know if these are the wetlands that were already disturbed by the current property owner. So are these trees that are kind of in an area that's already maintained as lawn? I'm trying to remember.
No, these actually are on the right-hand, facing the property on the right-hand side. These are all
Okay.
the gnarly weeping willows and what have you that are falling.
It'll definitely take a site visit, but I'm not sure I would recommend using an excavator on those.
Well, here's what I'd like to do, if I could suggest. I'd like to be able to go in and hold those trees or limbs with the excavator cut it all down, but cut down low enough and leave the stump without taking the stump out and disturbing any of the ground around the stump, because the stump, whether it's a growing tree or a stump that's cut, it serves the same purpose.
I think that's just gonna be something I have to see and determine on site, because I just don't want an excavator being used and sinking into a wetland, obviously.
No.
So,
It's not really that far away. I mean, it's something that the excavator can reach.
okay.
So
Off of
we'll be
this
sitting
pad?
on a high ground, and it'll reach over.
Oh, yeah, I have one right in front of me. So the excavator can reach it off of, like Tom just said, the excavator will be able to reach it off of the pad?
Off of the pad or the grass that's just in front of the pad
Okay.
on the right side. Yeah, we're not going into that wetland.
And,
Just for safety's sake, that really should come down. I mean, it's just, you'll see it when we take a look.
another comment I made was just that every effort should be made to conduct demolition activities, which you projected at 3 days when dry weather is forecast. So, I would recommend, just checking out the weather before you start the demolition and trying to get a good chunk of 3 dry days.
Right, well, I
So
gave
we-
it 3 days. I mean, if I had my schedule would be to work off of the asphalt driveway that's there as a working mat, add to another tracking pad where we need to off to the side. But work off of that mat, put the dumpsters right behind us, the excavator goes, reaches the house, puts it into the dumpster, the other excavator working off the pad will crush it down into the dumpsters, and they're out of there. There's about 5 dumpsters. So it's not a big deal. The house will be down in an hour and a half, and
Okay.
it'll be loaded. So it's not, I just gave us 3 days as an
Got it.
outside number.
Okay,
So it's not
and
a-
I'm just saying dry weather, just to ensure that we don't have there's no, worries of erosion of anything into
Well-
offsite wetlands, or
Okay,
outside
I
wetlands.
understand that. The only thing that wet weather will help us is with keeping that dust down.
That is true.
And I'm not gonna, and as far as we're not gonna get into the excavation of the foundation. There's only a crawl space anyway with a rat slab in there, so it's not a lot of concrete.
Okay,
So we're just gonna take the wood debris, put it in the dumpsters, get it off-site as quickly as possible. So there's not gonna be any lingering dumpsters on
Okay.
site.
that was all I had for comments. I'm not sure if the rest of the.
Any other questions? Mr. McCann?
Question. Refresh my memory, Tina, did we ask for a site monitor to be employed by the applicant?
Yes, I don't think I have the permit with me, but the site monitor was,
Construction.
for during the construction process. I don't know if I had it in there for the demolition, but what I would suggest, I think I even wrote it in here. Should a rain event occur during demolition, the professional wetland scientist or ecologist should inspect the site and ensure stormwater management controls were effective.
Yeah, well, the idea of the site monitor was that we have one inland wetlands agent nowadays, and she certainly has her hands full. So I know when the application came forward, that was one of the reasons we were trying to get a site monitor to give you periodic reports, which
And it's in the permit for the construction
construction.
process. I don't think it.
wasn't out for the demolition.
I don't think so, but I mean, if that's something that you think is needed, we can ask Mr. Fitzpatrick if he'd be willing to, but I honestly, like Tom just said, as long as it's
He'll
controlled,
be gone by noon.
and I've inspected
Take longer for the dumpsters
and
to
I've
get there.
inspected the, silt fence on the site to make sure that all the sediment and erosion controls are in place, I think it's a pretty simple
Yeah.
process.
Any other questions? Mr. Hoyt?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the demolition plan for application for permit 2017-4, and to note all the concerns of the conservation officer to be also put into that, the approval as a safeguard, or whatever you want to say, but that's my motion.
Okay, we have a motion approved with some conditions. Second, Mr. Blake. All in favor? Motion carried.
Thank you very much.
New business.
No new
We
business.
have no new business. Staff report.
I had one administrative permit that was issued for 2560 Huntington Road for a of a 160-square-foot shed within the upland review area of wetlands. And this area had actually already been somewhat disturbed as a chicken coop used to exist there. It's outside of the wetlands proper. There was no major impact to wetlands. It was granted as an administrative approval. Other than that, I believe it was at the last meeting, maybe it was Mr. McCann, had raised the question of what was going on at 350 Whippoorwill Lane. If you guys recall, that was a violation where the applicant had come in and clear-cut the property. He was given a cease and desist order by the planning and zoning administrator back when I was out on maternity leave, so we're talking like 2016. We eventually granted the violator a permit to develop the site, but first restoration of the upland review area had to take place. That planting for the restoration was supposed to have started taking place right around now, spring of 2019. And I have not yet seen any bonds posted, so I reached out to the applicant's agent, Mr. Owen, and asked what the deal was. And he said he's still waiting on approval for development from planning and zoning, and they're all tied up there. And I said, well, listen, you're still obligated to perform the restoration of the site as per the conditions of not only the wetlands permit, but also the order that was sent to you for the violation. So I'm working with the town attorney to figure out the next steps on how we go about getting that restored. It's going to be especially problematic because the applicant has never given us a bond for the permit, which I wasn't expecting them to. They didn't want to give us anything until they got their permits from planning and zoning to go ahead and move forward with development. So there's going to be some back and forth there, I'm sure.
Did he ever pay the $500 fine?
He did pay the $500 fine, but that's not going to get us very
No.
far in restoring $18,000 worth of restoration. So that's, hence I'm working with the town attorney. I'm sure what'll have to happen if the applicant doesn't come forward and give us the bond amount, which we would then turn around and use for restoration, there would probably be a lien placed on the property.
Mr. Hoyt.
I just have a question on the parcel itself. I hadn't gone out there, but I was just wondering how much it self-regenerated over this period of time.
Good question, I don't know, Mike. Oops, sorry, I'm offline here. Good question.
I know that, you know, a planting plan and restoration plan was important, but I just believe that over time, a portion of it is going to restore itself.
And I'm sure a portion of it did. The extent, though, of the clear cutting of the trees, I'm sure some of the wetlands shrubbery has started to come back at this point, but there was so many trees. Like, I can't remember what the number was, but, I mean, there was a lot. It was a real clear cutting. It had to be dozens, if not 100. There was a lot of trees. So a portion of the restoration was actually replanting of those shade trees. So even to get that back would be nice. So again, I'm working with the town attorney on that.
Tina, didn't we have a stipulation where it's like 5 or 8 years, you couldn't do any development at all until?
Right, but he had to plant first, he didn't do that, so it doesn't matter.
He had to plant first, and then so long as the restoration was deemed successful by the wetland scientist, then they could come back to us after 2 years.
Petition, right.
And we would give them the go-ahead on the development portion of the lot. However, that would still require the approval from zoning, which they have not received yet. They haven't received any sort of approval from the planning and zoning department. However, that doesn't stop them from doing the restoration as required.
Mr. McCann?
You said
Mr.
he submitted plans to zoning
He submitted plans to the zoning department.
without doing any restoration at all?
Correct. Correct.
How can he do that?
He can do whatever he wants. He can still submit a plan to, we approve the development, we approve the restoration and development. Now he's trying to go to planning and zoning to see if he can get the approval to do the development. Now that he's getting pushback from planning and zoning, he doesn't want to do anything on the property because it's just gonna cost him money.
Planning and zoning must know we have a restriction on him, on the restoration.
Correct. They have our permit.
Mis-
Might as well give him his plans back and say, take it off, because you haven't done the restoration.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I think we have to keep, there's two separate issues here.
Right.
I mean, there was, this remediation is for a violation.
Correct.
It really is separate from giving him the permit. We said we'd give him the permit based on the fact that we had initiated a restoration plan that was part of a violation. So I think we have to just kind of, in our minds at least, separate the permit away from, we have a violation that has never been remediated. He paid the fine, but he didn't do what he was ordered to do.
That's right.
And hence.
And that's what she's gonna follow up with on.
I'm saying, so that's why I think we have to, try to keep that issue separate and just say, how do we deal with a person who has ignored an order to restore on a violation in terms of a mitigation?
And that's where I need the town attorney.
And whether he ever went for a building permit or built a house was no concern of ours. All we said is, you gotta undo what you did or do the best you can to undo what you did.
Exactly.
Period.
I mean, that's the way we have to proceed. Forget what the rhetoric about, I didn't go get something from planning. We don't
I
care.
agree, and that's exactly what I told him. I was like, you're obligated to do the restoration. It doesn't matter that you're held up in planning and zoning. It has nothing to do with the fact that you clear cut a property and you have to make it right, so.
Well, that's why we talked about, I don't know, if we have to go in, we've had in the past sent in contractors, I mean, to take a look at what has to be done, and with the threat that we are going to hire these people and send you the bill. In fact, we have, in our bylaws at least,
One meeting here, guys.
we can hire professional people to come in.
And we have the entire plan. It's actually a very nice restoration plan as submitted by.
I mean, this is beyond illicit to flat out misdemeanor. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating. So I'm working with the town attorney. Hopefully they'll give me some guidance on what the next step is. And they submitted a decent restoration plan. It's very nice. And we can find somebody to implement that plan and go in and do all the planting. It's
Your
just,
money.
will we get our money back? And how are they gonna go about getting our money back? So, that's, again, why I'm working with the town attorney.
Maybe a lien is the answer. We'll have to find out.
I believe that's what they would have to do, is lien the property.
Okay, where are we up here? Administrative?
I already did the administrative.
Commissioners'
permits.
forum. That's it. Motion to adjourn, Mr. Cinto, second. Mr. Waite, all in favor? Thank you very much. Good night.